Story panel. I am Yamil, TTRPG writer and editor for fiction and for TTRPGs. I work with Goodman Games, Stiff Whisker Press, Orthane Productions, others, and I'd like everyone to introduce themselves.
Kevin E. Davis, I write magic in contemporary times, contemporary fantasy, or urban fantasy, and also magic and cryptids.
Good morning, everyone. I am the pansexual librarian wizard, Alexander Gideon. My writing's talking best be summed up by the phrase, and many people died. Let me tell you, the book that just released yesterday really lives up to that. I write historical fantasy, epic fantasy, horror, sci-fi of several different flavors. I have a queer romance coming out in a couple of months. I've got some spicier romances coming out in a couple of months after that. Basically, you pay me to write it, and I will.
Hi, I'm Alexandra Kristen. I write paranormal romance and romantasy, occasionally some urban fantasy. I've been doing it about 15 years, and yeah, that's me. And it's been a very long time, so I'm like coasting today.
Thank you guys. So let's kick it off with, what's the definition of backstory in your respective genres? I know there's a lot. Yeah, starting from the other end.
Yeah.
Well, I write romance, and in romance, it's all about the characters and relationships. So backstory is very, very important in romance. Now, I'm not saying that you should definitely not info dump. You should leave clues about the character throughout the book, because that's what makes it interesting. But you need to learn everything you can about your character's backstory before you even start, in my opinion.
I mean, backstory is going to be important in anything that you write. Really, backstory is just what you know about the character's history. And what parts of history you need to know can be really dependent upon your genre, If it's horror, we probably are going to find out about what traumas are making them really afraid right now. For historical fantasy, I say that my historical fantasy starts a lot heavier with epic fantasy, but if you're going really deep into historical fantasy, then we're going to probably want to know why, if they are a historically relevant character, why they are historically relevant. What have they done up to this point? In general, we're going to want to know the interesting things you probably didn't know. And so what is needed in backstory, what's good in backstory, is really genre dependent.
I find backstory huge, even for your side characters or your the person even that you have over to the side. I work with a lot of short stories, and even then you need to have a concept of it. Part of the reason is people act based on their beliefs and motivations, and those are formed from their life experiences. So as you're showing your character, you're showing these elements, and if you don't have a reason for them to be terrified of certain things, they fear snakes, or these elements, and if there's not something that has drawn down from their whole life and affects them in different ways, you can feel it when you watch TV shows or read books where it just doesn't feel like the character is the person that they portrayed originally. They give you this feeling of character, and you're like, I get that, I like that. And all of a sudden they're acting weird and differently. It's because they didn't have enough information about that person to really make their motivations and beliefs real. And that's why I find backstory so important, is it gives me that ground that I can find. It takes time sometimes. Sometimes you really have to put, this effort. I put a lot in doing collaboration with someone, and most of what we're doing working back and forth on is we are working on the two characters that we're going to be main staging and the side characters, and what was their one of them's a golem, 2,000 years old. One of them's a werecat that has grown up with a family of werecats, and they both have different reactions to things, and they both also have their own attributes. Mixing high intelligence one person with a very difficult life can react will create a different personality. So for me, backstories are huge, and there's a lot of ways that I build those out.
Yeah, just to build a little bit more, or focus more, my favorite thing in terms of backstory, using it for dialogue. Because unless your character is working at a call center and they have to work on the script of like, hello, thank you for calling AT&T, how may I be of service? Like, they have an opinion, their way that they speak, the way that they have approach a certain other character in that world, even if they're super minor, the backstory, you have to develop that. Because that way, they kind of become, you get, in my opinion, you get them added to like a toolbox, right? Where you can go back to a scene and be like, okay, maybe here I can highlight this aspect of my world or my story because of what I've already done with the backstory. So it lays a foundation. And
Well, just like human beings, your backstory informs the decisions that you make. So, and like you were saying, it's very annoying, and they do this to female characters all the time, and I don't know why, but they'll be going along, and this person's a genius all the way up through, and then all of a sudden, towards the end, they make this absolutely stupid decision to carry the plot into the end of the book, and I hate that. And like you said, it's because their backstory is not informing the decisions that they're making.
And there was a show or movie, Atlas, and it was almost exactly that. She was portrayed absolutely brilliant. Okay, she could beat the computer, it's future. She could beat the computer on chess. Everyone says she's a brilliant analyst, she's brilliant. But we needed to fall into a Hollywood trope, where she needed a man to give her permission to do something. So she starts acting, I really need to go. And I'm like, that's not the character you just told me. This is an analyst. This is a brilliant analyst. She's probably, 20, 30 points above this guy.
Right.
She can turn around and make enough of a analytical argument for being on that, and I would have gone, that is the person that I first saw. So if you start to go off of that,
and if you do that, and you can do it, you can make them act in a way that wouldn't they wouldn't normally act, but you have to have a really good reason for that. Does anybody watch Peaky Blinders? Is anyone a big fan? I'm a huge Peaky Blinders fan. And Holly Gray is one of my favorite characters on the show, and she is just as diabolical as every other man, because her whole thing is, because it's a mob show, and she's like, the women ran the business, the whole time you guys were off fighting World War I, tough as nails. Well, then she makes some of the stupidest decisions, and you're like, a woman that's this intelligent and would never have done that. But her weakness is her son. So whenever she makes those crazy ass decisions, it's all in service of something she's trying to do for her son.
And those are the kind of things as well. It's like, for backstory, you can have those things that make you go crazy. I mean, we all know the smartest people making just that one dumbass decision, and you're like, why would you do this?
Right.
I know who you are and how you reason through things. Why is this your one thing? But if you're gonna do that, there has to be an acknowledgement of, why are you doing this? Around, and that's how you can bring it in and be like, yeah, no, we know that you are smart, and we know that this isn't something you can do.
This is a new aspect of character that
so
we need to learn.
Yeah, it's like, all right, where's your mental state? Is there an emotional state that's causing this? And there needs to be reaction from everyone. If they do this, everybody just goes, oh yeah, that's what it is. That's what you're like, no, this is not the character that you've established up to now. And having that backstory coming back, especially when you're writing, can, one, make editing hell. Because if I hadn't, so in this one, this is the first book, this is actually the first full-length novel that I've written. This is the first one that I had a total of 8 POV characters, 2 main, others just having some different ones. I only had a half chapter of one POV, but him and his wife have been the side characters throughout the entire thing. Well, I didn't know how his final fight went and the reveal that they were going to have in it. If I didn't know about that, there's an interaction with another character that I would have had to have gone back to the entire book and changed every single one of them. Because her name, everything about her informed how they reacted with her. And for just a half of a chapter's worth of POV, I needed to know all of that to set it up to make you actually, in that moment, go, oh, and have that, like, you look back at every interaction and go, oh God, this whole time? And it's like, backstory gives you payoff as well.
I think we
Okay.
started with him.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
just making sure. Didn't want to talk over. How does, we kind of hinted at it at the beginning, how does and I'll start with this one, genre affect the type of backstory? We talked about world, we talked about history. For me, and again, I'm just a big dialogue guy, and TTRPGs, you know, mostly like NPC dialogue is
I'm a dialogue girl myself.
but let me, I wrote a noir story that was under somebody else's IP, and I had to, I didn't have access to, I had like an anthology Bible, but I didn't have quite robust, basically the way it was, because it's from like the 1930s IP. So I just had to like read everything and get it out, right? So I'm from Puerto Rico. I'm 35. I like Humphrey Bogart. I love Double Indemnity. But it's not my culture. So I had to like really get into it. I did my research about San Francisco in that era, about the different jobs, I have various books on Alcatraz. I have a bunch of random useless facts for prisons that are no longer open in Northern California. And all my big point is all of that was for a short story.
Right.
And most of it was not used, but it was there. It was like the tool set. And some of it, I was like, don't really like that. I'll change it up a little bit. Yeah, so I feel like it's just be fluid with it, but like there has to be, you can do overkill, you can do on the fly, you know, that's the whole pantser, plotter type thing plays into it. What do you guys think?
I will say, you know, talking about like genre, how it changes with backstory that you need. You know, as I said before, for like horror, that kind of thing, generally we're going to look more at traumas and that kind of stuff that is leading us into either why they are scared or why whatever is doing the scaring is doing the scaring. For historical, you want the backstories of why these people are important. In epic fantasy, look at Tolkien. You know, a really great example of how much backstory can go into a single moment is you have to either read it in the books and know the backstory or see the extended edition of Fellowship of the Ring. It's the smile that Legolas gives Gimli when he tells Legolas that Galadriel gave him 3 of her hairs. And because there's this whole backstory of her being asked for that, and her seeing the darkness in the soul of this elf and not giving it to him, being considered the greatest of the elves, but her giving 3 to Gimli when she wouldn't even give him 1, and Legolas knowing this entire backstory, seeing this, knowing Gimli has no idea, his smile saying, my relationship with you has changed because Galadriel has acknowledged you in this way. This is all backstory you have to just know. But it makes that moment so much more poignant, even though he's not giving it to you. He knew it, and that's why it brings that in. But backstory and a character that is definitely a character that a lot of people don't forget as a character is your setting. Victorian London has a character, you know. A lot of this book is down dirty knife fights in Whitechapel. You've got to know what Whitechapel is, and you've got to know what it's like being in Whitechapel in 1899 under, still, even like 20 years later, under the shadow of Jack the Ripper. And the way it's always dark, the way that they are, even when there are gas lamps, they're going to destroy them because they don't want the light there. And the lamplighters are not going to walk down that street because they don't like to die, generally. And the way that, yeah, there's a lot of working girls there. But they're not out very late because they remember even 20 years later. So there's all of this character and backstory that you need to know for your setting. Why is this alleyway that they're in, whatever's happening, and why is this market square important in your epic fantasy? For your historical fantasy, what is the historical significance of these? For horror, one of my favorite horrors ever is Dead Space, if anyone knows that game. The Ishimura is a character, and what its layout is like, it's how claustrophobic it is, the fact that these things are coming through the vents.
The ship, you want to clarify?
Sorry, the Ishimura is the ship that they are on. I talk about it so much that it's just... the USG Ishimura is the ship that they are on and trapped on and is being dragged back down to the planet. The engines have been sabotaged, and there's something growing in hydroponics that's poisoning the air, and it itself is the character. So always remember your setting.
And I think that's one of the reasons why drafting is so important. I always cringe when I hear people say, "Oh yeah, well I finished the book at midnight on Tuesday and I turned it in to my publisher on Wednesday." You couldn't possibly had time to do more than one draft if you've done that. Drafting is where, the first draft is where you get all of that stuff out. At least if that's my process anyway. You get all of that stuff out. All of that backstory where you have just done all of this reading and researching and talking to people and all of that to inform your characters. And, you know, if you're an overachiever or former gifted kid, you want all of that work to be there, damn it. You want everybody to see, hey, I did this. But nobody wants to read 800 pages about, you know, this person's, and I have a hard time with Victorian London, because I could go on forever and ever about Victorian London. Nobody wants to read 800 pages about the, you know, the humdrum habits of lamplighters in, you know, 1893. Nobody wants to hear all that.
I bought a paper about Victorian tipping customs.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, I read numerous things about, like, and Alex and I kind of write in a shared universe together, so we kind of know. But read all about like flower etiquette and all that shit.
Flower
Gives a
meaning.
damn. So you know, it's like all of that stuff. You got to have all of that stuff in there. But then in the first draft, you can go, okay, wait a minute. I went on for 3 pages, waxing sentimental about flower etiquette. We don't really need. We need like this piece of information. So how can I show the reader all of this other stuff by incorporating it into the story so that the reader understands, but we don't have to read this treatise about, you know, flower meaning. Right. And God love her, Anne Rice was the queen of that. She would go on and on, it's just as something really interesting was about to happen. She would go on for 55 pages about the garden that they were standing in. Who gives a shit? I don't care about, you know, the gardener that grew this night blooming jasmine that smells like, I mean, it's just, and I mean, it's great. I get it. I understand. There are some people who love that. I am a very efficient writer. I am not a person who is into that. I would much rather use those details to add to the story and push the story along than to have something that's kind of separate. And that is, it's really hard, it's really easy to slip into that trap in romance because it is such a sensory experience for the people that are reading a romance novel. They want all of that stuff. They want to know everybody's dirty secrets. They want to know exactly how a person looks and, you know, how they smell and all of this other stuff. And suddenly you've got 5 pages about this guy unbuttoning his jeans. And it's like, nobody gives a shit. Nobody gives a shit. So that's what I always use the drafting phase for that. You know, I get it all out and then I go in and go, okay, this sucks, this sucks, this sucks. So that by the time I actually send it to an editor, they're like, okay, you know, they're not getting
we can focus on the story and not just all of this.
Right.
An example of something that I did, and I'm to my own horn here, because I just love this line at this moment. I actually got a nice out of Teresa for it. That is very hard to do.
What was that? I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?
So the editor for this originally was Teresa Glover, and she is a very hard-ass editor, but there's a line that I actually got her comment that said, nice. That is not easy to do with Teresa. But there's so much backstory that I could have explained and explained and explained and explained for all of what Elaine Simpson and this one went through. But the way the scene played out is that she's being asked, she has to go in and she's basically facing her family that are using Malleus Maleficarum to hunt down magical things and magicians. There's all of this trauma that she's gone through. But the way I was able to, like, in half a page, present it. She's being asked, you know they're going to torture you. Like, why are you? She's like, of course they're going to torture me. She takes her entire shirt off, shows her back. It's covered in brands and scars. And she's like, one lash for every mistake in training, one brand for every mistake on the mission. And she turns around and shows this scar that goes all the way across her chest. And she says, this is a gift from my father. They're monsters, Wells. And if they taught me anything, it's how to kill monsters. And there's so much backstory being given in that in half a page. We have this whole history of her. And that's the kind of thing that you want to do is you have to know the 40 pages of backstory to write something that is half a page. And you've got to do it with any character that's important. Another thing that is great about having that backstory and knowing it is sometimes the characters surprise you. I did not think that Dorian Gray was going to become a main point of view character, but he is, with the backstory that has been established. You start going, he's really interesting, actually. Let's put him on page. Which is why I also suggest never rule out characters becoming main characters, because you will also have readers tell you characters are a main character that you did not know was a main character as well.
I do a lot of anthologies, meaning I publish anthologies. So we have to slash through stories. And you will see, as far as genre is concerned, we do horror, we do spooky, we do, presently explicit romance is coming out. But of these elements, you can tell when someone has put the time and effort to even have a limited view of what that character should go through. When you're dealing with epic fantasy, when you're dealing with a large fantasy world, magic is going to change culture. And that character has lived that. You haven't. You need to have a character so enmeshed in that concept that by the time they reach the page for you, you feel that. You recognize that they have lived a life. Dragonride is a portal. Okay, you have characters that have lived a life that you haven't, but part of the way they deal with the life, the way they're acting on the page, tells you what the culture is like, rather than your, what you would have as if you suddenly drop there. You are suddenly dropped there, so you need someone to cue you into how that culture lives. So that's on like fantasy. You get into romance, and yes, there are certain traumas that matter as far as how they might react, but most of all what matters is how they have reacted in their life. If they've been a loner for 20, 30 years, and they have suddenly a relationship, they are not suddenly like, oh, I'm going to swoon over you. They have like so much distance going
I know how to
on.
communicate effectively.
Okay, because it has never worked for me. So each one of those elements need to be considered for the genre.
I want to expand upon that a little bit as well. Is one of the things with backstory and why, especially in like otherworld fantasy that's completely its own world, enmeshed in magic or sci-fi, enmeshed in all this technology, is a good example of things to do is, you guys didn't know what the Ishimura was. But I'm so enmeshed in all of that story that I'm like, obviously. So why would your point of view character sit here and give you this long explanation about this technology, this magic that they use like breathing? Why would you sit and if you're talking about your smartphone, why would you go into a whole diatribe about what a smartphone is? You use it every day. It's just a thing.
And people do that.
And it's-
office will show that, they're like,
Yeah.
on my phone, it does this, and this.
Well, as you know, and it's
Product placement is a different panel. Getting sponsorships.
But, you know,
Kickstarter.
you want to find the ways to give the information in a natural way for us to understand what it is without going, well, as you know, Dave, this is how a cell phone is working in the year 2300. No, you just know. And so that is how you have to present it. Because you will be surprised. Now, and a good exercise is to read through a fantasy, read through something, and see how much you end up knowing explicitly through how they are describing it. Because you will write and think, oh man, they have to know all of this about how this thing works for them to understand. They don't. They will understand a lot more than you expect them to. Trust your readers.
And that will actually get you dropped out of a slush.
Yeah.
Okay, if you're running through and it is 3 pages of exposition of how the universe was created, okay, before we've reached a character, there's no chance, absolutely not. If you start off with some sort of, emotional draw, KAV, kinetic audio, visual, with some sort of emotional draw, we'll be locked into that story and go all the way through the end.
Mm-hmm.
And the readers will go through it. I have other readers that will put in more time, but other ones will, mark it down as almost a zero ending because they never got there. Because they were so tied up with, someone trying to explain a cell phone or, in
Yeah.
literally the narrator's voice. Okay, literally, cell phones were developed and, like, what? And by the time you actually get to a person talking or some kinetic action within that story, you don't care. You just want out of the story. And they've only given you 5,000 words. If they burned up 300 to 400 on the universe's creation, you're not going to be interested either as a slush reader, publisher, or as a regular reader.
There was a story that
No, you're fine.
There's a story that I had published in Zombie Seed Brains called The Eyes of Odin. And the whole concept, and basically there's this whole concept of how time works. And we are in a moment where it does make sense to explain it because he is in present day Atlanta with a cop going to this person that is murdering people by aging them until they die. And so he's like, okay, he just pulls up his holo-screen. Time is a tree upside down. Thousands of branches collecting into one. Schrodinger's points, where they come, something happens, something doesn't happen. Time ends, Schrodinger point decides what happens, and it continues on from there. What she is doing is making something doesn't happen, something does happen. She's making the does happen, doesn't happen. Time collapses, the whole branch collapses from there. That is a complex thing that took me 2 to 3 weeks to work out how that works. I explained it in a paragraph and a half of dialogue and everything. And it's a different panel, but short stories are really good for teaching you how to write and present backstory and that kind of stuff very tight, very efficiently, and it's why I recommend them. Because it makes you present that in that small amount of
When
time.
you have 90,000 words, you often
Yeah.
can cut the first 30,000. Believe me, there's whole chapters that some people put out that is like you pretty much could have started about halfway through chapter 2, and you could have pulled all the stuff that you gave me in the beginning and tucked it back here. Short story, you don't have that option. You got a very short time on it, and you'll get up to about 5,500 and go, what was the limit again? And you look back, it's 5,000. Okay, honey, gotta go. And the reality is, you're using your characters to give a lot more information when you get rid of the content.
Absolutely.
And
Okay, my motto as an editor and as a writer is always show, don't tell. And you can do that by something as simple as a half-page dialogue between 2 characters. You can reveal so much by stuff like that. So, show me, don't tell me about it, show me.
So let's switch it up a bit. What are some good sources for backstory? Whether it's people, places, things, your favorite, or a funny one that you might have.
if you want a really good study on how to write amazing characters, go buy everything on David Coe's table. That man is master of crafting characters that you are locked into. I mean, he is the reason why I focus so much on character. He will tell you character is everything, because no one gives a shit about your story if the character sucks. It's the reason why I can't read most Grimdark. Because, yeah, I'm supposed to care about the story, and we're on page 2, and he tells all his men to go rape everyone? No, I don't care about this person. If I'm reading this, I want him to die, and I don't like to want my main character to die. He writes really great, fleshed out, full-bodied characters. I mean, Ethan Cale in the Thief Taker series is
Yes.
a really great representation of how you take 3 books to have the entire backstory of this character revealed, because it only comes out at moments that matter within that series.
One of the tools I use, and I was working on the collab and we were sort of working through this. I have characters that argue. I like triangles. I like 3 people in 3 characters, and
He likes those threesomes.
shh, not that bad. So, but I like to have the conflicts and the support that goes on often. So if you have 3 friends, there'll often be conflicts and support within that. But I'll take 2 to do most of these, which is I argue things like politics within that work, because I learn about the characters as I'm doing so. I'll argue whatever is going to be emotional, religion, politics, or such between the 2 characters, so I can see them at their agreements, and I can see them at their conflicts, and I can see some of their personality. There was a lady who named some of this stuff like Conversation with a Dragon. I forget what it was called. But the idea of being able to have conversations between my 2 characters prior to ever writing, they're never on page. This is nothing that's ever hitting page. This is just me doing the workout. When I do, I suddenly realize that this person, has this emotion, has this reaction. Why? Now I need to know why. Why did they react this way? Why do they believe in this viewpoint? Was it what they grew up with? Was it some element with an accident or incident within their life? Those help me bring it out. So these conversations that I'll have between my characters, I'll try to get to where I have all the people. I even have conversations between protagonists and antagonists that never happen. One of the most important backstories is the antagonist, because often we'll create a very tropey Hollywood, just evil kind of thing, and you can feel it when you read it. It's like, why is he doing what? He just does this stuff? And instead, if you actually believe that this antagonist would do these things, it's much more horrifying. It's more, much more dangerous when they are actually invested in what they do. And only it comes from giving them a reason to be this way. And they may be smart enough to actually believe that they're going to, cause a more positive end result, even with all of the harm that it's going to cause. Having a conversation between that person and my protagonist, which again never really happens, but it's just part of my process, will give me a much bigger depth on that. Have I built that motivation and belief system properly?
Antagonists are really important to have a backstory for, because there's something that, especially Hollywood antagonists, the way that they will like to write them, can fall into, and it's something that you want to be able to get around. Black Panther is an amazing movie. There's a thing that they did with Killmonger that I don't really like. Hollywood tends to do this, and it is, hey, everything they're saying makes really sense, but they're a villain because they're just going to murder everyone. And you're like, with everything that we find out about Killmonger, would he actually have? Is that really where he would have gone with this? So you're telling me that he wants to, he's like, why doesn't Wakanda come in and I see the plight of all of Black people in America and everything, why are you doing nothing about it? So I'm just going to kill everyone. And you're like, that's what you're going to do when you're king? And you can tell where those kinds of sentiments come from. And so it's like, in that situation, and things like that, you need to, the best antagonists are ones that you go, oh, you're right, Magneto. Magneto is a fantastic antagonist in that you're like, I don't even know if I can fully disagree with your methods. And you're right, but also at the same time, how do you look at, the elderly Holocaust survivor and go, no, you're wrong for battling fascism and this, genocide you're trying to do. You're totally wrong, and you shouldn't resort to violence. No, you should resort to violence.
See, and this may just be because I think Michael B. Jordan is like hot as hell. But I don't think Killmonger was going to kill everybody. He was just anybody who got in my way of doing what I know to be right, I'll deal with you accordingly.
Was that when he became king? They didn't show him really trying to follow through with all the things that he said, I want to be this for. He just kind of went more like despot in that moment, and you're like, no, that's not what you said.
Hey, well, and the thing is, the best villains are the ones who their cause may be opposed to everything we think of as good and right, but they believe it absolutely, and they will do whatever they have to do to accomplish that goal. And that's not necessarily a bad quality,
Yeah,
So.
I mean,
Like
like
some of-
Magneto.
Some of the antagonists that can be most terrifying are ones that we don't understand. Sociopath. Okay? So when you turn around and peel away the human aspect, you have to be able to show that this was either developed or existed prior and was the entire personality and is part of it, deeply part of it, that they just enjoy inflicting pain. Because if you just do it casually, then it becomes just a trope villain out of Hollywood.
Right.
But if you do it well, and it's part of their history, part of their backstory,
Right.
that they've always been this way, just getting away with it, and now they're at this new level that you, the protagonist, need to stop. Now we've got something to work with, but that backstory still has to be there. But you can have ones that are fully uncomprehendable by hopefully most of us.
And you get on the flip side of that though, is where you run into, I call it Hannibal Lecter syndrome. Because, okay, the Hannibal Lecter in Red Dragon and Silence of the Lambs, now, they do a great job of showing all of his backstory without really telling you. He doesn't really ever tell Clarice anything that happened to him before, but you get all of that just from the way that he is and the things that he says. In that one incident with Miggs in The Silence of the Lambs, that encapsulates his entire psychosis right there. This is a person who is a stranger who has come in. You have insulted and offended this stranger who has come in. That is incredibly insulting. That is horrible. You are rude. You deserve to die. That encapsulates his entire character right there. But the problem is and I think Thomas Harris had this problem, once you create this character, this backstory, and you know everything about this person, and you are into his psychosis, and you have worked so hard to make him not a sympathetic character, but an empathetic character. Well, now we've fallen in love with him, and now suddenly, we're making him this romantic hero, which is what happened in Hannibal. And then, and I never read or saw Hannibal Rising, so I don't know anything about that one. But then the TV show went even further into making him a romantic hero and everything. And I'm like, okay, Hannibal Lecter is interesting, but I ain't inviting him over to dinner.
Listen, Mads Mikkelsen. I'm not saying that I, wouldn't lay down on Mads Mikkelsen's table, but Absolutely.
Green wine at least.
But when you talk about incomprehensible characters, and it's one of the ones that we think of as like that incomprehensible is Joker. He's very famous, but at the same time, he's not. He's not incomprehensible. But we only get the glimpses of those moments. I think one of the best moments, and you only need the first line of it, is in The Killing Joke, when Gordon is going through the tunnel of love, and you've got just that line of, memories can be vile, repulsive little brutes like children, one might say. That line itself, the whole thing gives so much backstory, but that one line tells you so much about Joker in that moment.
And you won't know to put it in there unless you've done the work.
Exactly.
And that's some of the time frame that it takes, is you have to have a good grasp of that in our work before you get to the point of being able to throw that perfect line out, because otherwise it won't work at a punch out.
So I think I'll open it up for questions or statements.
Yes, well, a statement and a question. My son and I created a mystery comic, and so I watch a lot of mysteries. One of my favorites is Midsummer Mysteries.
Yes.
And
Love that.
but Midsummer Mysteries does something that really annoys the heck out of me. It has to do with backstory. They often keep the real killer as someone who seems innocuous, of course. And I see that's, leading the audience astray. But you don't find out significant information, significant parts of the backstory, till very late in the show, so you can put it together. And by that time, even Barnaby has got it. And
Right.
I'm trying to think, I want to be nicer to my readers.
No, you don't.
But, okay, well, I was thinking, how much backstory of the let's just call them the suspects, how much of their backstory can you let out at once?
Something that might change the way you think about mysteries. The mystery itself is a character. Because what is going on, it's this presence of, there is this thing I am trying to figure out. Yeah, it is force of nature. This is the thing. It can be these different people, and they are part of what makes the character of the mystery. And so the mystery's background is what you're figuring out. The characters that could be it, their backstory matters to that. But that's why you have to know that backstory to get all the way through. A really great, probably no one in here has seen or read it. You can read it, it's a great translation. There's a book and manga and anime called Another. And it is a horror mystery. And when you see the event that they're trying to figure out through all of it is such a presence that you're like, this is, and it's actually literally a person at the same time, but the mystery of it is the presence. And when you finally get the thing, which you have figured out the mystery by the end, and then they twist and they go, yes, this is the person. But did you know? And then they actually, in the actual anime, they do this flashback sequence where they show you everything that hinted at it. And you're like, you couldn't have done that if you didn't know the mystery's backstory, if you didn't know where it's going. So thinking of it as a character is a really great way to bring that mystery together.
I wish we could get Lucy Blue to come in here and explain how she writes a mystery. Lucy writes the Stella Hart mysteries for Falstaff books out here. And when she gets ready to write one, she does it backwards, and I wish I could explain how she does it, but she does it backwards. She knows who the killer is at the beginning, and then she has actually lists out each of her suspects on a piece of paper, and it's simple yet complex. And she gives each one of them a reason to kill the person who dies, and and works out the formula from there. And that's actually how she outlines the book. She goes from the back to the front, and her mysteries always work out. I wish I could do it that way. She does a phenomenal job with that. And there's also a difference between cozy mystery and hard-boiled mystery too.
Yes.
Cozy mystery, you want it, and I would consider Midsummer Murders to definitely be a cozy sort of thing. It's very formulaic because you want the viewer or the reader to have that nice experience of figuring it out one step before Barnaby figures it out, and it makes them feel smart and makes them feel good. So And so cozy mystery is all based on a very formulaic. You know that the killer is going to be the person that, you know, Barnaby bumps into on his way into the crime scene or something like that. Somebody that they never even look at. That's got to be the killer. But then in a hard-boiled mystery, you have red herrings and everything where, you know, it could be, you're convinced that it's this person all the way until about 3/4 of the way through the book when that person dies, or when that person is revealed to have an airtight alibi or whatever. So, I mean, it just kind of depends on what you're going for.
Now, you were asking about exposing backstory within the story, how much to do. And a lot of that is going to depend on this outline that I use, is where you're trying to give the clues so that there can be a moment where, and you have different moments. You have the people who will get it here, the people who will get it here, the people who will get it here. What you want is no one getting it here, okay? Because then you just ruin the entire story.
Unless they just happen to guess. That's the only way they get
Yeah, and it is, and a lot of us do that. Oh, it's this person. The backstory that you would expose would depend on what information you're feeding them. In other words, you could give the entire backstory of the fact that I loved to read when I was a kid and spent a lot of my life in libraries. Had nothing to do with the reason why I killed her. Okay, so you could give me that backstory all you want, if you felt like it had any element within the piece. So the amount of backstory wouldn't matter. It's what you give as a backstory, what element that leads to the actual clues to where you want the person to catch it. So you usually want to put a few pieces in here that wouldn't make any difference until right here when you give the final piece of that blacksmith puzzle. It loosens it all up, and it's like, that's got to be the person because this, and this. Things you told us earlier that didn't matter. The amount of backstory wouldn't matter. It wouldn't really matter to bogging it down. But I'm saying, as far as the mystery is concerned, but the components of it and when they're given would matter huge in mystery. So you could do it as far as if you know, what you're probably talking more of is the clues you're being given, whether backstory or not, because the clue might not be backstory. But the clue that you're being given aren't close enough to the point where you want to catch, where you want to break through. If you, as a writer, you can choose how early you want them to go on. Just recognize that some people are going to be earlier than others, and then make it still interesting for those who have guessed. That's a hard thing, but it's fun if you can play the characters like, how stupid are you? You're still chasing that guy.
See, I would argue against that, in that all clues in the mystery I would consider backstory, considering the mystery of character itself. Each clue is a backstory of what this solution is. If you want a really good representation of what happens when you don't know your backstory in your end game, it is Lost. They didn't know where they were going. They didn't have a full plan. They didn't know what the actual thing.
They didn't expect to get that many seasons.
Exactly.
Right.
But it's like, even if you don't, you have to have that plan. And I mean, on top of that, on like how much plan matters as well, I think in as much as I love the entirety of Supernatural, there's a reason why 6 and 7 lagged a lot. It's because Eric Kripke went into it and I have 5 seasons. This is my entire arc that I wanted to do. And then he gave it over to other showrunners. But I mean, how good were the first 5 seasons? And it's because all of the mysteries around it, he knew and were seeded throughout.
Yep.
Backstory is always an iceberg, though. What you know is that below the surface, and you only want to have that little bit above. Backstory is what keeps it afloat, because that little piece isn't really going to float well unless you have the supporting underneath.
And if you get down there and show the whole thing, your readers will follow.
Yeah.
And I think I saw a question in the back. Yes.
What can beta readers be helpful as far as working on your backstory for whatever you're writing?
Absolutely, and especially for a long-running series, having beta readers, your editor, of course, is going to know it really well, but having beta readers that know your series really well will really help. Especially if you have a long-running series, please do this. You want to have what's called a world binder.
Yep.
Even if it is modern day, it is all of the character attributes what color are their eyes? I mean, getting the eye color wrong can be really important. The entire reason why Tolkien wrote everything that he did is because Christopher Tolkien caught him when he was telling the story in person, mixing up eye colors, and he went really quiet, and very famously said, "Damn the boy," and went and wrote it down, and that's how everything started. But you want to have that world by them to know these are each characters. And honestly, having their backstories on that is a really good thing as well, because then it gives beta readers a chance to be like, I read in your Bible that you have this, and then on page, that's way too much. Because, especially on, like I said, on running, book 3, you did all of this, and we continue to keep it, you don't need to do this here. You're just reminding yourself because you're on book 6 and you forgot everything that you read since book 2, because we all say we read back through our stuff. We don't do it as much as we say we do.
Good. Questions? Go ahead.
I find that when I'm trying to develop a new character, a lot of times, and it might just be because of the needing more practice at it, but a lot of times my characters end up being kind of autobiographical without meaning to be, and then I get annoyed and bored and don't like my character anymore. What kind of advice do you give to, because I'm so used to the write what you know kind of deal. I don't want to write myself all the time.
Do you play Dungeons and Dragons?
I would love to learn. I've played once.
Okay. All right. This is just a suggestion. This is my 2nd grade teacher suggestion, okay? In Dungeons and Dragons, if you play with a hardcore purist who makes you roll the dice and keep the rolls that you get, because you have to, when you start the game, you have to roll ability scores, strength, dexterity, wisdom, intelligence, all that stuff. Do it like that. Roll the
I actually have
dice.
character sheets.
Yeah, seriously, make a character sheet. Roll the dice, you know, and you will, because it's just chance, create somebody with attributes that don't have, and you don't have to use the D&D ones. You can come up with, you know, your own little set of ability scores, you know, and just roll the dice.
You can also grab characters that you like. There are, what is his name, Briggs-Meyer, that you can turn around and you can take a look at Avasarenda out of Expanse. And you got a cranky old lady already. Okay, now turn around and say, you know, what if I brought her forward 50 years? What was she like as a tough, dominating, but still don't give a shit about any one person? What was she like then? Okay, and if you look at like Briggs-Meyer, like the NTGSF, when you turn on, you figure out their personality type. Well, she's always been, you know, an explorer. She's always had those kind of attributes. These are her flaws, and you take that as a very loose guide. Okay, but you've just turned around and you've grabbed something and you've shifted it, and then you've looked at it over here. Now you have this view. It can't be you. You just turned around and moved the puzzle pieces too far. So now maybe some of you mix in. That's enough to just modify that, but not create you, not your experiences. So those are little things you can use. There's also generators online that you can turn on and get all kinds of information about a blank person, and all the way down to weird stuff like the license plate number, which I never understood because it would match. But it gives you things that you can just turn around and go through. Brainstorming groups. We have one weekly brainstorming group where we just go through ideas. And we can turn around and like talk about stuff, and having someone else bounce an idea off of you. Turn around and say, you know, well, the worst character for that would be a plumber. You know, a really, lazy plumber. And then you're like, well, I'm not gonna have a plumber, but you know what? This, and this, and now you've turned it off. So in a critique group, in other words, his head instead of mine. If I turn around and say, I'm thinking of doing this with a character, he's gonna have a little bit of a different thought, and he's gonna bounce it off of me. Between those, you can come up with something.
Thank you for that, because I never actually thought about using Myers-Briggs because you can pretty easily be like, and I really like the ideas of, my partner actually yesterday was asking all of her friends what their Myers-Briggs types were, because you can look at an INFP and an ENTJ, how did they go together?
React.
The and how each of them goes. And now I want to do a Myers-Briggs for every one of my characters, because I'm like, that's a really cool idea. Something that's also, but on page, something to do, always have a character sheet. And when you're writing things, look at, does my reader need to know this, or do I need to know this? And if you determine I need to know this, well, you go copy, paste into a character sheet, because this is stuff that I need to know, and now I'm taking it off of your page. A really cool thing that I've done in character sheets that I cannot remember where I got the idea from, someone who did it. In the character sheet, it is, what has it got in its pockets is? Because what you keep in your pocket tells a lot about someone. And so just knowing, like, on a normal day, what would this person have in their pockets or in their bag? Or what do they carry with them? Do they carry a notebook with them everywhere they go? Well, I mean, that's a difference of things. Do they have a measuring tape in their bag? If they do, why? Why would they carry that? Like, what is the significance of that?
What do you know? How do you know what I have in my bag?
Duct tape and rope over here.
Yeah.
Because we all have that friend that pulls
Another
that thing out of their
session.
bag, and you're like, why do you carry that?
It's like nail files of women. Like there's a very specific, there are two kinds of women in this world. Ones that carry nail files in their purse and ones that don't. I don't know what it says about them, but every woman you know, they fall into one of those categories.
Well, I mean, listen, you can stab
I
the
am not
hell
a
out of-
nail file carrying person.
But listen, you can stab the hell out of somebody with a nail file. So that's all I'm saying.
So to finish up, and we can, but just, where can people find you on the internet, the con? Because I think we're coming up on time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We got 8 minutes.
I'm at alexandrachristian.com. My table is out there. I'll be here till 2. And I'm going to be in a Romantasy panel next.
I'm Alex Gideon. You can find me at alexandergideon.net. Best place to follow up with me is on TikTok at PanLibrarianWizard, right down there. I have a table right over here. You can get the books of the law, get the Wayfaring Stranger. I'm going to be here till 2, 3, probably more like towards 3. Basically, I'm going to be here until they start telling me I got to leave.
KevinArthurDavis.com or inkpub.com. Right over here on the other side of Hartness, in the corner at the bathrooms.
JoseYamil.com would be my website. I have a newsletter. Sign up, keep in touch. You get a free RPG that maybe you could use for backstories. And thank you guys very much. Thank you.